The Georgia Freedom Award will be presented annually to a Georgian who exemplifies the true spirit of freedom. This nation was founded by individuals escaping the tyranny of government. They were seeking opportunity for themselves and their families. This award is dedicated to those courageous individuals who laid the groundwork for our democratic system of government. It will recognize those contemporary Georgians who are continuing the struggle for liberty and justice for all. The first recipient of the Georgia Freedom Award is United States Supreme Court Justice and Georgia native Clarence Thomas. His lifetime of achievement and dedication to principle makes him immensely qualified to receive this award. His courage and determination have allowed him to succeed when the odds were stacked against him. We are proud to salute and honor him tonight.
I want to add my personal word of welcome to each of you here this evening for joining us in honoring Judge Thomas. It's been my great pleasure to be his dinner table, a magnificent American, a great Georgian. You've heard a great bit about him already. You've read about him in the program. You'll hear more about him in his formal introduction. And he, no doubt, is a brilliant lawyer, and no doubt will write many, many very important, very meaningful opinions during his tenure on the Supreme Court. But to me, what tells me more about Judge Thomas than any legal opinion that he will ever write, and to me, one of the epitomes of why he is so deserving of the award this evening, which is the first award that the Georgia Public Policy Foundation has given, the Georgia Freedom Award, is what he did for Mark Davis. And there's nothing that I think means more and tells more about the quality of the human being than the thoughtfulness that he would take the time to care enough to encourage a young man to be everything that he can be. And I said to him tonight at dinner, his opinions will go down. What Mark Davis will do, he will never fully know how great a contribution he has made to one young man. And Mark, I wish you the best of everything in life, and just remember that there will be a time in your life when you will have a chance to do for someone what Judge Thomas had a chance to do for you. And it is with a great, great deal of honor and pleasure, Judge Thomas, that I have the ability and honor to award you the first Georgia Freedom Award by the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. And I say to you, it's not just from us, it's from all of us, all of the Georgians who love you, who respect you, who wish you well. And I would like now, if you would, to come up and let me give you this award in one way. As you will notice, it's an eagle, and we always want you to do one thing and one thing forever, and that's may you always soar with the eagles.
We're going to make the judge come back up here in just a minute. Don't worry. Thank you, Hank. And this is a Georgia affair, so we need to keep it with the home folk. And I'm told that this weekend, in some remarks here in town, Justice Thomas was asked in one of the ultimate softball questions, how come so many famous people came from Savannah? And he said the operative words were from Savannah. And then, getting serious for a moment, he added a one-word answer: gnats. So, with that in mind, let me introduce to you a person who still lives in Savannah, who will introduce officially Mr. Justice Thomas. Roy Allen, all of you know, is a Savannah Democrat who was first elected to the state Senate from Chatham County in 1990 and is now in his second term. He's the chairman of the Senate Governmental Operations Committee and vice chair of the Judiciary Committee. He's on the Appropriations Committee and several others. He's an experienced legislator. He served 4 terms in the House from 1982 to 1990. Some of the finest years in American history. He was a member of the Chatham County Commission in 1980 and 1982. He received his, he got away, I haven't figured this one out. He received a BA degree from Howard University, just across town, as we say, and an MPA in Public Administration from the University of Georgia. He earned his law degree from the University of Connecticut and has done graduate work at Yale and at Harvard. He served in the U.S. Army Reserve. In real life, he's a businessman and an attorney, a partner in the Savannah law firm of Allen and Morrell. He is a longtime childhood friend of Clarence Thomas, well known to people who followed Mr. Justice Thomas's nomination. Roy Allen.
First of all, thank you, Dick, and thank the members of the foundation for allowing me this great opportunity. Hopefully I get a chance for the first time to debunk many of the myths about Pinpoint, Georgia. For those who may be shocked, there is no Pinpoint, Georgia. Pinpoint, just as there is no Virginia Highlands, Georgia, there's no Buckhead, Georgia. Pinpoint is basically several streets in unincorporated Chatham County, but it's unincorporated, but the place is Savannah, Georgia. And probably with this Supreme Court justice, it would be probably a waste of my time and yours to go through all the educational, the academic trainings, because you know that already. There probably has been no justice who's gone through the most sifting and thorough examination process than my good friend, Justice Thomas. But I want to talk about some humorous points in the whole process. One day when I write my book, I'm going to have a real good chapter about the confirmation process. I can't think of the reporter's name from the Boston Globe, but he said, Mr. Allen, having gone to St. Benedict's Catholic School, and when y'all were on the playground, did you see promise in Justice Thomas? I said, who at 9 years old is worrying about promise? Or it gets better than that. A reporter from the Atlanta Constitution called me up and said, I want to talk to you about Justice Thomas. But we want to know some background about you. I said, well, I'm a Catholic, conservative, pro-life Democrat, if there is such a thing. And the reporter says to me, nah, you kidding. Now, really, who are you? I said, you've got to understand, I come from a staunch Catholic family like Justice Thomas, his grandfather, his brother and I, Myers, and we're all members of the same parish at that time, and his grandfather, the Holy Name Society. And I said, now, if you don't want to hear the true story, then don't waste my time. I'm going to tell you about the gentleman that I grew up with and the guy I know. And he said, well, where did your conservatism start? I said, well, you got to understand something. I come from a staunch Catholic family. In addition to that, I've got 3 children working on some more still. I sat 8 years next to John Linder in a Georgia house. And so you've got to understand that my conservatism didn't just start last week. And I said, as I mentioned on one national show, I think Bill Bennett was on that show, I said, you've got to understand something. Many people in the black community, probably most are conservative, if you really talk to them and know where they stand and what they believe. And I said, the national press does not give us that attention. And then when I tried to talk to a reporter from the New York Times and said, take me to Pinpoint, Georgia, and I said, well, I can take you to Pinpoint. But no, it's got to be a Pinpoint, Georgia. And I said, well, if you find it, let me know. I don't know what county it's in. We were in Chatham County down in Savannah. Well, we understand that he went to school and he walked several miles, he was barefoot. I said, wait a minute, wait. I said, who are y'all talking about? I said, Clarence's grandfather was an enterprising businessman who sold wood and coal and gave a lot to the Catholic nuns. I said, so now maybe if you want a story, if you want to color it up and hype it up for publications, that's great, but if you don't want to know the true story, then you're wasting my time again. And then the best story, I think I told Skin Edge's story in the Senate, was the Strom Thurmond story. Throughout the confirmation process, the Bush administration had flown me enough places where I must have at least 5 million frequent flyer miles. I'd get a call at 2 in the morning, Justice, from Mark Paoletta, can you come to Phoenix? Can you talk to a group in Montgomery, Alabama? So I want you to know that I'm not going to bill you for the time that I closed my law practice, but the night that I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Justice Benham, I'm sitting there with Attorney General, former General Griffin Bell. And I'm watching my watch because the last flight from Washington National into Atlanta is about 8:30 or so. And so here it is, 8:10, and Strom Thurmond says, Senator, I see you watching your watch. And they called Griffin Bell, Judge, I see you watching yours. Is there a problem? And I said, no, Senator. The last flight from Washington National back into Atlanta is about 20 minutes from now, but this is more important. I want to offer my testimony into the record. And Griffin Bell has to be in London the next day, and he says, look, I've got to be in London for a client, but this is more important, no problem. He said, don't worry, I'll get you to the airport. Well, here it is, 8:25, and the plane, the Delta plane, Delta's ready when they are, believe me. Strom Thurmond sends for his drivers, and gentlemen, the Secret Service is driving us. We're in a limousine about the distance from here to downtown Atlanta. 3 television monitors, 3 phones, and the driver's driving like 5 miles an hour down there. And I said to Griffin Bell, I said, we're going to be wasting a lot of time sitting up in the Washington airport. I don't want to sit up in the airport all night long and go back to the hotel and check in. And Griffin Bell says the same thing. We get to the airport, and we're running. Now, here I am. I played basketball and ran track in school. I'm with Griffin Bell trying to keep up with him. And we're trying to catch a plane, and we get to the airport, and the guy in the red jacket says, are you Senator Allen? I said, yes, sir. He said, are you Griffin Bell? He said, yes, sir. He said, don't worry. We just got a call from the White House, and this plane ain't moving anywhere. On a serious note, though, I am very happy to have this great opportunity. Justice, I've got to leave probably by the time that you end your speeches, I told you, because, again, Delta's ready when they are, and as a trial lawyer, I've got to be in court tomorrow, and as many of you know, the justice will be in Savannah without protesters. And so, we don't allow that in Savannah, Georgia. But to come here on this evening, I took one offense after the confirmation process. It's been said that Justice Thomas will walk in the footsteps of Thurgood Marshall. I took offense for that. I respect Justice Marshall. I said, no, if you walk in the footsteps of Brandeis and Frankfurter and Holmes and Black and many others, and not just one Supreme Court justice. And so I say to you tonight, Justice Thomas, the Franciscan nuns who spent so many hours with us hitting aside the head with sticks, the Franciscan nuns who taught us our Baltimore Catechism, the Franciscan nuns who left Ireland, gave all they had, left home in Ireland to come teach a group of black boys and girls, to teach them and give them an education, to sit in the back of the bus with us, to walk the streets with us, and they're happy tonight. Lastly, one reporter said to me, he said, Senator, you got to be a little bit jealous. I mean, you and this guy came down the same road. I said, no, I got one jealousy. The Franciscan nuns who taught us, for the most part, have dwindled down to a few in Tenafly, New Jersey. And I told Justice, I said, you know, we raised money for the nuns, and we got this real large fundraiser raising money for their retirement, because many of the nuns, the 70-year-old nuns, take care of the 90-year-old nuns. And they didn't have any kind of retirement plan. They were paid a great sum of $15 a month. So I asked Justice Thomas several years ago to come down and speak, and I said, Clarence, there's no money involved. You pay for your own plane ticket, and you can stay with your mother at Pinpoint. But the thing that I'll remember about that situation, I said, well, one weekend I called, I said, Sister Virgilius, who was Clarence's teacher and one of my favorites, I said, Sister, I'm coming to Tenafly, and you know that little suite you all have in the convent? My wife and I would like to have it, you know, coming to Tenafly, New Jersey, to visit the nuns and go to Mass every day. And she said, well, Roy, I'd love to have you, but I think Clarence is coming down. I said, Sister, what about me? I thought I was your favorite. So he's moved me out as the favorite product of the Franciscan nuns. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce a great American and an equally great Georgian, one that I'm proud of and one that I know that many children will read about in years to come. A man who I'm glad to say was a product of St. Benedict's Catholic School, and he stayed in the seminary 4 years. I stayed 1 day. I'm happy to present probably the greatest American alive today, the Honorable Clarence Thomas, Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
You deserve a great job, buddy. You're a great man, buddy. You deserve it. You're a great man, buddy. You deserve it. You deserve it. Every bit of it you deserve. You're a great man, buddy.
Well, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank Senator Allen, Roy, for that very, very generous introduction. Brought back a lot of memories. And when you try to explain to people that there is no Pinpoint, Georgia, there's Pinpoint. And if you don't have any business down there, don't go down there. But Pinpoint is a community. I'd like to thank all the wonderful people here tonight and the Georgia Public Policy Foundation for this wonderful award. Gets a little bit embarrassing when people say a lot of nice things about you. You usually get a little bit more used to criticism than to nice things being said. I don't normally do this, but there are a few people here, if you don't mind, I'd just like to say are here. And the reason I'd like to say it is that in recognition of the people who spent so much time making life better for us, as Senator Allen mentioned. There were some Franciscan nuns who gave their whole lives, or dedicated their lives to making life better for us, and who really believed in us. But there are products of their work all over the country, and there are a few here tonight. I'd like to just embarrass them, because we went to school together, we grew up together. And I remember looking out on the White House lawn, the only good day that week. It was a beautiful day when I was being sworn in, and seeing all the guys I went to school with out there, and all my friends from Pinpoint and my relatives. And it's one of those occasions when I almost lost it. But I'd like to just mention a few other people who were also with us back with the nuns. There are two others. There's Clifford Hardwick III, who's a lawyer here in town. We all went to St. Pius, and he went to St. Mary's. But his wife Joyce also went to St. Mary's. Joyce Hardwick. And there's another product of St. Benedict's in my neighborhood and the corner, and just a great friend, Carlton Stewart. And his wonderful wife, Barbara, who keeps me straight. And my godchild, Nene. I'd like to thank you all for having me here tonight. Sometimes, you know, when you come to award ceremonies, you like to keep it real short. I probably won't do that. But just remember that you always have the benefit that I'm standing on one leg, and that leg can only last so long. I'd like to, and this is the last person I'm going to thank, but I'd really like to thank my friend Larry Thompson for all his help and friendship, and for helping me in coming here tonight, as well as my trip to Mercer recently. Larry, could you just stand a second? Now, I'll tell you all, these are real friends. These are real friends. They say that when times are good, your friends know you, and when times are bad, you know your friends. And I knew these friends when times were bad, and I appreciate them. This has been an absolutely wonderful day. I've had a chance to visit with the justices on the Supreme Court of Georgia, the judges on the Court of Appeals, some of the Superior Court judges and magistrates. I had a chance to visit with them last night. I had a chance to visit with the Phoenix Club this afternoon for lunch. And I've had a chance to do everything but rest. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful afternoon and wonderful day, and this is a wonderful way to conclude it. Tonight, this award and this occasion is a fitting conclusion to my visit in Atlanta. In the name of all that I have been taught by my grandparents, by the nuns, and by those who took the time just to help me out over the years, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. This award is yet another reaffirmation that those two people who took us with all of our belongings in 2 grocery bags and on that momentous Saturday in 1955, that they were right. They were right to have hope. They were right to invest their lives in us. They were right to hold firm to what was good. They were right to resist fads. I accept this award with humility, and I will display it with pride. Since going on the United States Supreme Court, I've given very, very few speeches, and the few that I've given have been related to my role as circuit justice or as justice. In part because there's never seems to be enough time on the court. The work is very demanding. However, during my years in the executive branch, I spoke quite a bit. In fact, during my preparations for my last confirmation hearing, one friend, after learning that I had given more than 100 of my printed speeches to the Senate Judiciary Committee for their review, asked why I had given so many speeches. I quickly assured him that the reason I didn't give even more speeches was because I ran out of time and I ran out of people willing to listen. But seriously, my brief tenure as a federal judge, with the exception of the brief interruption for my confirmation as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, has been most rewarding and fulfilling. Throughout my year and a half on the court, I have found the working relationship with my fellow justices and their clerks and staff to be courteous and kind. From my first day on the bench, I found that regardless of my junior status, I was treated with the same respect as justices who have been there for 20 or 30 years. Well, maybe with the exception of the Chief Justice. Everyone treats him particularly nice since he handles all of the opinion assignments. And if you want work, you're nice to the Chief Justice. But all kidding aside, the cases we decide are usually very difficult, and of course, there are times when disagreements among the justices are intense. But out of respect for ourselves and for the positions we hold in the institution, we take care to remain civil and respectful to each other. That is not to say that in some of our opinions we aren't tough on each other's legal views and interpretations. There are differences. This does not carry into the court dining room or in the hallways in the form of disrespect or incivility. So I've settled into court life, and despite what you may have heard, and you hear quite a bit of fiction, I am very happy with the challenges of the work and the friendship of my colleagues on the court. And I do intend to be there at least 4 decades. Beyond your wonderful hospitality and this wonderful award, there's another reason why tonight is so special. This occasion gives me yet another opportunity to say thank you. I will never be able to express just how much the support of my fellow Georgians, how much it meant to my family and me during those bleak days in the summer and fall of 1991. Since I'm somewhat of a Washington area nomad, before my 4 previous nominations, I was identified in my commissions and on my nomination papers as Clarence Thomas of Missouri, Clarence Thomas of Maryland, or Clarence Thomas of Virginia. But for the Supreme Court nomination, I asked President Bush to nominate me as Clarence Thomas of Georgia. When President Bush mentioned my Georgia roots as he announced my nomination in Kennebunkport, I felt immensely proud. To me, it symbolized my coming home. And as that inglorious summer of '91 wore on, home came to me in the form of cards, letters, calls, flowers, prayers. And today, as I stand here, I know that it was all worth it. It seems so long ago that I left for the first time in the fall of 1967 here in Atlanta. I had just graduated from high school seminary and was on my way to college seminary in Missouri. I took the old Nancy Hank from Savannah to Atlanta, 1995. Then flew from Atlanta to Kansas City, Missouri, then on to Conception Junction, Missouri. Those were turbulent times in 1967 in Georgia, across the South, and around the nation. Intolerance and bigotry still define the relationship between the races. Of course, we all have our stories to tell about how we were treated or mistreated in those difficult days. And from time to time, I've speculated that racial attitudes had still not changed sufficiently for me to return to my home state to practice law after law school. I would certainly have liked to come back, if for no other reason than after spending 6 years in school in the Northeast, I was dying for some decent Southern cooking on a regular basis. But seriously, I allude to this possibility of discrimination not as an indictment of anyone or to place blame, but only to note that racial prejudice permeated all of our lives in one way or another. Only to that extent was it non-discriminatory. Growing up in the South, we were never far removed from prevailing prejudices. We lived with them on a daily basis, as children when we couldn't swim in most public pools, as adults when we were looking for work or trying to rent an apartment. The prejudice and racial hatred that drove our national consciousness has complex and to a certain degree undiscoverable roots. But one of its consequences was the lack of civility toward members of my race. I focused on this undignified, uncivil treatment so many of us suffered because in this hardship there is wisdom. For if we have not learned of the tragedy and damage caused by mistreating others, then so much of that terrible, I'm getting back to my Georgia roots now, saying terrible, that terrible struggle was in vain. And although we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't admit that racial stereotypes still linger in 1993, I believe we all have benefited from the struggles of those years. Tonight, I would like to share my thoughts about a principle that seems to be falling out of fashion these days: civility. For if we have learned anything from the hardship, it is that no good can ever come of treating others badly, whether on account of their race, religion, or gender. As the customs, practices, and laws governing the relations between the races changed, we feared the backlash of incivility, if not outright lawlessness, that was to follow. We saw how so many resisted change for the good. This was so in no small part because there is comfort in the extant stereotypes and prejudices. It is far easier to hold fast to generalizations rather than to take the time and make the effort to judge people on an individual basis. Thus, for years, the years following the civil rights gains of the 60s, we found ourselves wondering if the country truly was ready to reject what the Supreme Court had told us in the Dred Scott decision, that the Negro had no rights that needed to be respected. But even as the harsh realities of interracial relations settled over us, for many, including myself, the intraracial sphere in which we live stood in stark contrast. Racial stereotypes of blacks and whites were dismissed out of hand as our families, teachers, and neighbors told us to treat others not as we were treated by them, but rather as we wished ourselves to be treated by them. As the outside world so often operated beyond rules of civility and dignity, as it held fast to prejudice, we did our best to retain our sense of fairness in order that unfairness in practice did not undermine fairness in principle. In our house, no one was allowed to use racial slurs to describe whites, even while it was not uncommon for blacks to be degraded by such slurs. Everyone was to be treated with respect, regardless of how disrespectfully we were treated. This notion of civility does not easily submit to definition. To pardon the phrase, it's sort of a we know it when we see it phenomenon. Most of us know when we're treated rudely, disrespectfully, or improperly. We also know in our heart when we treat others uncivilly. Perhaps with all the problems in the world today, this might not seem very important. In this country, crime and poverty still plague us. In Bosnia, we see the attempted extermination of an entire people. Yet notions of fair play, civility, and respect for the inherent worth of another person's ideas are all values that have been vital to the continued success of this country and essential tools which our leaders must bring to any domestic or international crisis. If we seem to have gotten off course, we might do well to start at ground zero, right at the beginning. On an individual basis, rules of personal conduct allow us to confront difficulties constructively, and they provide guardrails down what is often dangerous and precarious road of life. One missed turn, one oversight could end it all. These guardrails, of course, kept us well within the bounds of the criminal law. My grandfather made it very clear that a man did not keep his good name merely by not breaking the criminal law. Our family laws required much more of us and did not permit us to wander into that gray zone of impropriety not governed by the criminal laws. So not only were we not to do bad things or engage in mischief, we were not to associate with those who did, because, as my grandparents would say, they were up to no good. Somehow, with the benefit of little formal education, my grandparents recognized the inexorable downward spiral of conduct outside those guardrails. If you lie, you will cheat. If you cheat, you will steal. If you steal, you will kill. Along these lines, I still have this now amusing memory of crossing East Henry Street at the corner of East Broad. Since Henry Street was one way and particularly busy, we had been told time and time and time again not to cross against the light. But as grammar school kids, we did it anyway. Well, on one of those occasions, a neighbor, Miss Gertrude, passed on a bus in the back. Her siren-like voice pierced the air, rising above the din of the traffic, all the bus noise, and she yelled, "I'm gonna tell Teeny." My grandmother. This meant major trouble. True to her word, she told. Before he delivered the punishment, our grandfather gave us the usual refrain, the usual disclaimer. "This hurts me worse than it hurts you." Even now, that's hard for me to believe. Yes, we were to be, as they said, mannerable, period. We did not dare walk down the street without saying good morning to Miss Gladys, Miss Mariah, Miss Beck, and especially Miss Gertrude, the latter for obvious reasons. We would never think of addressing an adult only by his or her first name, or as the adults would say, without a handle on that name. We would never refuse to take a trip to the store for an adult who asked. We knew that we were not to litter or damage the property of another, regardless of how much the property was worth. And I remember the do's maybe even better than the don'ts. Church on Sunday. We were all altar boys. Tend to property on Saturday. Wash the car. Cut the grass. Polish your shoes. And all of us, especially my brother and I, were expected to work. My grandfather imposed a rule that seemed pretty harsh then. If you don't work, you don't eat. And he meant it. Needless to say, I liked eating, so I endured working. But my grandfather also had a corollary rule that revealed his soft, kind side. When you produce more than you need, you give to those who could not do for themselves, but not to those who could. To them, you give a chance to work. It wasn't until I got older that I realized why my chores never seemed to end, because my grandfather provided me with a steady stream of work for work's sake. Or better put, work to consume idleness, which he and the nuns called the devil's workshop. And let me tell you, even if we felt as kids that unending work was unfair, there were no negotiations about the work or the rules. By decree of my grandfather, my teachers and my grandmother were always right. And by decree, though not always right, he was never wrong. I still don't know what the difference between the two of these rules is. Regardless of how we were treated by others, we were expected to rise above our circumstances rather than becoming consumed by them or by the natural reactions that stirred within us all, those destructive passions. The family's poorest in means were often the richest in manners and values. That was comforting. Resentment and other destructive passions were not free to breed in such an atmosphere. There were guardrails. While as a kid I sometimes saw this regimen as nothing more than a plot to keep me from training to be a pro basketball or football star, as an adult I see how this nurturing of manners and good work habits gave me the independence, discipline, and self-respect that I needed for college and my life as an adult. Certainly much has changed since those days. Most significantly, no longer is there government-sponsored segregation. While discrimination, no doubt still hovers about, its face does not resemble that of my youth. The mere fact that I'm here tonight, that there's so many other justices, judges, senators of my race here tonight, this mere fact is an indication of just how far we have progressed. But sadly, although much has changed, much has not. Many of the old problems have resurfaced elsewhere in our society, under different rubrics and with different justifications. When I left Georgia over 25 years ago, the familiar sources of unkind treatment and incivility were the biggest. Today, ironically, a new brand of stereotypes and ad hominem assaults are resurfacing across the nation's college campuses, in the national media, in Hollywood, and among the involuntarily ordained cultural elite. And who are the targets? Those who dare to question current social and cultural gimmicks. Those who insist that we embrace the values that have worked and reject those that have failed us. Those who dare to disagree with the latest ideological fads. Signs of this began creeping up during my college years. Back then, wearing an afro hairstyle was in vogue. Often I heard it said that you weren't really black if you didn't wear an afro. Though I occasionally wore my hair in this style, I certainly didn't define myself by my hairstyle or my barber. This conformist mindset struck me as particularly incredible, since we had barely freed ourselves from being judged by others on the basis of our skin. My reaction to this was to leave my hair uncombed for most of my college career. And I'm still not sure if anyone ever knew the difference. I see Clifford Hardwick over there laughing. He knows. It did kind of look a mess. Perhaps this seems funny now, but it did portend greater and more serious stereotypical dictates. Later in life, I would be told that I did not think black, by white critics, no less. During the 1980s, I watched with shock and dismay how friends of mine were treated for merely disagreeing with what my friend Tom Sowell referred to as the new orthodoxy. As a black person, straying from the tenets of this orthodoxy meant that you were a traitor to your race. You were not a real black, and you would be forced to pay for your ideological trespass, often through systematic character assassination. The modern-day version of the old public floggings. Yet, just a few of those victims were Clarence Pendleton, Walter Williams, or Jay Parker, not to mention Tom Sowell. Undoubtedly, there are untold numbers of others who've been made to pay the same high price for their ideas. Instead of seeing signs on the public doors saying, "No colors allowed," the signs I saw were, "No non-conforming ideas allowed." This tact of damning the dissenter by skewering his character rather than by substantively criticizing his views occurs while unyielding praise is heaped on those who write, speak, and think the language of the new orthodoxy. Their assertions go unchallenged, untested, and then are passed on to our children as truisms and truths. The ultimate effect is that many cower in fear of speaking out publicly on certain issues or policies due to the unrelenting personal attacks that are likely to follow. This is what I refer to as the new intolerance. It gives me a sense of deja vu, or as Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again. In many ways, it is just the same old thing we've seen before, just as invidious and perhaps more pervasive than the incivility that black Americans suffered throughout much of this century. Its perniciousness lies in its masquerade. Cleverly, the purveyors of this new intolerance claim legitimacy in the name of fostering tolerance, sensitivity, or a sense of community. Yet in my experience, these popular buzzwords are merely trotted out as justifications in an attempt to intimidate and silence those who dare to question popular political, social, or economic facts. To defend this turf from criticism, competing ideas and points of views are ignored and the jugular of the dissenter vengefully slashed at. Does a black man instantaneously become insensitive, a dupe, or an Uncle Tom because he happens to disagree with the policy of affirmative action? Is it any more justified to hurl invectives at him for what he believes than to call him names for the color of his skin? In both instances, a man's reputation is disparaged and his name sullied. In neither instance is he treated as an individual. Is it really any more laudable to make a man afraid to express his beliefs than it is to make him ashamed of the color of his skin? Does it make sense to criticize someone who says blacks look alike, then praise those who insist that all blacks think alike? One of the things I looked forward to when I first went to Washington was the opportunity to debate and discuss difficult issues with those who had competing ideas. The closest I came to this environment were my dealings with my personal staff during my days as chairman of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They challenged me. We debated. We disagreed. We saw issues in ways that we hadn't seen them before. The unfettered exchanges were liberating. When I arrived in Washington, I just assumed that although the legitimacy of a person's ideas were fair game, his character was not. So you can imagine how surprised and disappointed I was to find that the reverse was true. Many issues were off limits, but ad hominem attacks were not. Those who had the temerity to broach these subjects, and heaven forbid, actually expressed a view contrary to the new orthodoxy were summarily dismissed as sellouts or insensitive. This was especially true for those of us who happened to be black. As soon as I began working in the Reagan administration, I was quickly and cavalierly described as an ultra-conservative. Why? Because I dared to follow the final counsel of my grandfather from some 10 years ago. I stood up for what I believed and for what he taught me. Later, I would be called worse things. Few flinched at the hypocrisy of it all. And for those who had the misfortune of not being black, well, they were racists, bigots, fascists, or Neanderthals. I'm still waiting to hear the cries of insensitivity about the casual use of these slurs. The silence is deafening. It is not surprising that this new intolerance has a devastating, chilling effect. I cannot tell you how many people have approached me in airports, restaurants, or on the street only to whisper how much they agreed with me or about how they think we need to get back to basics in this country. While it's heartening to know that there's an undercurrent of common sense running through our country today, it is saddening to know that so many are fearful of challenging the advocates of this new intolerance. Of course, the reluctance is understandable. Being their victim is no fun. It is no more enjoyable than it was 25 or 30 years ago, when we feared for our safety if we were caught walking in the wrong neighborhood after dark. It is imperative that we recognize that where blacks were once intimidated from crossing racial boundaries, we are now fearful and intimidated from crossing ideological boundaries. And that such intolerance and incivility that fuel both types of intimidation are reprehensible. Just as so many worked tirelessly to end the undignified, uncivil treatment of blacks in this country, it is incumbent upon all of us to do our part in order that the new intolerance does not succeed in stifling the free exchange of ideas, the only way to begin to solve what seems to be intractable problems. Women have the right not to agree with the feminist agenda and not to be personally attacked for it. Blacks have the right to criticize welfare policies and not be lashed by the cultural elite for doing so. If you succumb to self-censorship, then the gains we have seen are hollow. If we lose this battle, we risk finding ourselves once again judged not for our individual ideas or conduct, but only for our skin color or some other immutable characteristic. Demand to be treated by your critics with respect and dignity, regardless of how strong the disagreement among you. Settle for nothing less than fair civil discussions where labels and stereotypes of any sort are rejected as harmful and counterproductive. Remind those who claim that your point of view is divisive or insensitive that open debate is by nature divisive, and that such divisiveness is to be harnessed by civility, not censorship. And tell them that what should really be off limits are personal attacks on those who happen to disagree. So this is a time for regrouping and rejuvenation. As I look out in this audience tonight, I see a lot of hope. When I was a brash and often angry young man, and I was angry, I would confide in my grandmother about my frustration and dejection. As I may have said, she passed away some 10 years ago, but I can still see her looking at me with those kind, strong, sensitive eyes. She would give me her usual sage advice. Son, do your best, be good, be honest, and say your prayers. I would respond, yes, ma'am. Perhaps we should all say, yes, ma'am, to her wise counsel and get on with the business of acting like we deserve to live in a free society. Thank you all very much.